Hey there, everyone. The mission of the church has always been to make disciples of Jesus, people who imitate and represent him well, who have his character and his competencies. But this happens in very different ways in different contexts throughout the world. And what God is doing halfway across the world can be an encouragement to each of us in our local context. So I'm here today with one of our Synod's missionaries, the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Naumann, to chat for a bit about what's going on in his corner of the kingdom. Good morning, Pastor Naumann.
Good morning, Aaron. How are you?
Good to have you with me this morning. We get to have this conversation. You said, as we were getting started here, talking earlier, that you're joining us from the Dominican Republic. What can you tell us about the place where you are?
Well, it's the Caribbean. It's not Central America. It's not Latin America. It's the Caribbean. And that in itself says a lot if you spend any time in the Caribbean. The people don't take themselves too seriously. They're very relaxed. Most of them are poor. They live a sort of hand-to-mouth existence, but yet strangely, that doesn't bother them. They don't feel self-pity. They just get on with it. And nobody dies of hypothermia, not with 93-degree temperatures normally.
How's the humidity there?
Actually, it's not too bad. It's kind of a semi-arid environment. We do have rain that comes through, but there's a water shortage normally. The city, I mean, not only do we not have clean drinking water, we don't even have water at all very often. And it's because of a number of different things. The plumbing is ridiculous. It's like a little plumbing hose that big to carry everything from sewage to tap water, and they're always failing. And we're a little bit above sea level, so that throws them off. So even though we pay for water from a city water supply, it never gets delivered. So we end up having to go to a private truck to bring water to us on a regular basis, or else we couldn't do laundry and couldn't take showers. And you don't really want to look in the cistern too closely, because you realize that's what you take showers with that water. That's what you wash your dishes in. And you don't really want to see the dead cockroaches, floating around in it.
Yeah, probably not. Wow, it's something that I think we in the North American context would, or United States context, would probably take pretty much for granted, and to have clean water and whatnot. Very, very different.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me a little bit, for those of us here listening or going to be watching later on, don't know, can you tell us a little bit about your story, where you've been, where God has sent you on your travels, and kind of where you've landed now?
Well, in my family, being a missionary is kind of a big deal and kind of not a big deal. 4 generations that I can think of have left the country where they were born. My great-grandfather left Germany to come to America to be a pastor. His son left America to go to Cuba to be a pastor and missionary. My father, who was born in Cuba, left Cuba to become a real estate broker. But that's kind of you skipped a generation. But then when I was born, I left America and I went to England to be a missionary for 21 years. And I came back to America, had a parish in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for about 13 years, and then was called back into international missions, which is what I'm doing now, except not in English, in Spanish.
Wow.
I have a mission to English-speaking missionaries, and I also work in Spanish with students at the seminary from a range of countries. I've got Bolivian students, Venezuelan students, some of which are not in the country, but now that we've got Zoom down to an art form, right?
Right, yeah.
It doesn't matter. It makes you wonder about teaching these days. I've been teaching for over a year through Zoom. My catechism classes are in Zoom. I'm starting a new catechism class for adults, and the first thing that came to mind was, let's do this by Zoom, which is something we wouldn't have thought of before the pandemic. But now, why drive through traffic? Why battle the heat? We can be in the comfort of our own homes doing catechism through Zoom.
Yeah, the pandemic has certainly changed a lot of things, and it's encouraging to hear that we've shared some of the same struggles as pastors working in different contexts a world away. Because for me, confirmation is coming up in about a week and a half here, and there's plenty of things that I've done to kind of finish my students' confirmation process through Zoom and teaching that way. But there's some things that you just kind of have to do in person, and that's finding the balance between those two things. I don't think anybody wants to be on 10 Zoom calls sequentially any day. That could be tiring.
Can I say one more thing about this family tradition?
Sure, yeah.
Two of my sons both left the country where they were born to serve as international missionaries. One of them left Scotland, where he was born, and went to Sri Lanka, and he's been serving in the Asia region of international missions for the LCMS. The other one, who was also born in Scotland, he left Britain to be in America, and he's now, I call him an international missionary in that most exotic of places, New York City. So
wow.
It's all part of the tradition, missionary service.
That's so cool. What a legacy of faithfulness. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think that says a lot about from. I have shared with others that my grandparents were missionaries in West Africa. So that same kind of missionary spirit, even the congregation I grew up in had that impulse and was constantly sending missionaries and support teams from our congregation overseas. So again, context may be different, but the gospel remains the same. And that's a really good thing. So maybe now that we've kind of established you're in the Caribbean, you're also, I understand you're serving as chaplain to missionaries throughout the region. What can you tell me about that?
Yes, the region is Latin America and the Caribbean. And we have about 14 countries that we're working in. Some are just missionaries only, and others are national churches that we are in full fellowship with, and we also work with, sometimes sending our seminary graduates to serve in those countries. Since we've had a seminary now for 3 or 4 years, we're able to see how we can serve those national churches, like Chile, for example, and Bolivia and places like that. It takes quite a bit of time just to rattle off the list of countries where we work. And there are about 43 church plants in our region.
Wow.
I used to even go to Spain, was part of our region, to visit missionaries there. But there's now some reorganizing of things. So Spain is going to be part of Eurasia rather than Latin America, Caribbean. So we've got all of these English-speaking or bilingual American missionaries, and then we've got national missionaries with whom I'm only just now beginning to be able to work, because I had no Spanish at all before coming here. And now I'm able to finally, after 5 years, carry on a reasonable pastoral congregation, a conversation with Spanish speakers.
Oh, that sounds like quite an adjustment.
Yes, yes, it is. I mean, my wife and I are both kind of in our mid 60s, and Spanish, learning a new language and all of that is really kind of a young person's game, but it's what we're doing. It's what we have to do.
Right. We
And
do
it's
what we
kind of
have to do to
working.
be effective. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask in your context what some of the joys and struggles are of ministry, but I heard you say a second ago that there are 43 church plants out there right now. What that sounds like a huge joyful thing. What can you tell me about those church plants?
Yes, it is fruitful ground, this region, whether you're talking about the Caribbean or Central America or Latin America, um, where two or three members of a family attend one of our churches, they're very likely to want to have us come to their barrio, their little neighborhood, and start a preaching station or a church plant as well. So yeah, it's much more receptive to the message of the gospel to work here than it was in the United Kingdom, for example, where people had more or less decided that after 1,000 years, in the case of Britain, 1,000 years of Christianity, Christianity had a good go. Now we're just going to move on to something else. Whereas in the new world, the developing world, people are not so cynical about Christianity. They go to our services. They're actually quite impressed by really everything, and then they come back, and then they want us to serve them. What can I say about their experience with the Lutheran Church? They all have a lot of familiarity with the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay.
And they, if they're poor, and they usually are poor, they have written off the Roman Church as something that they cannot attend for various reasons, one of which is financial reasons, because they actually charge for baptisms, they charge for confirmations, charge for other church services, weddings and funerals and so forth. And it's just beyond them to be able to afford to be a church member. So here we provide churches which look and feel just like the Roman Catholic Church, except none of the associated expenses are involved.
Well, I mean, that goes back to the Reformation, right? When cost and money became a hurdle or a barrier to the free gift of God in the gospel, Luther certainly stirred up a hornet's nest when he started chipping away at that. But I suppose when people start to hear the gospel, that's always a win for the kingdom.
Yes, yes. We have a new hymnal that we are hoping to put out this year, and it contains some of these liturgies that we use, which are they're different from the Lutheran service book in almost every way. However, they still are what the Lutheran confessions would call the historic Mass. You've still got the Kyrie, you've still got the Gloria, you've still got the Credo and the Sanctus and the Agnus Dei. Those 5 parts of the Mass are all with us. So we haven't abolished the Mass, but we've certainly changed it musically to musical settings which are Latino, often accompanied by guitars. And the words, of course, are all in Spanish. And it's a delight to be able to offer them something of actually quite high quality. The hymns in the hymnal are Lutheran hymns. In fact, this may be, you might have to fact check me on this, but this may be the only hymnal, the only Lutheran hymnal to contain all of Martin Luther's hymns, certainly outside of Germany. It's got more Luther in it than the American hymnals have.
I love how you make the connection between the Roman Catholic context and people's familiarity with that, and being able to let solid theology kind of resonate with people in a setting that feels probably not so strange to them. That's great. I want to make sure we keep on moving here. What struggles do you see in your context?
Well, the physical needs, and I would include emotional needs of missionaries, are wide-ranging, going from the red tape that comes from residency requirements, to housing, to the emotional consequences of being far from family. It's almost, imagine military personnel deployed on a foreign field who are also immigrants. I mean, at least when you're on an American military base somewhere, you're not an immigrant. But you don't get that. Where we live are not little patches of America, like Guantanamo Bay, for example, is a little patch of America. We're immigrants, and we face all of those things, from being illegal to being, having to leave the country, to come back in, to have our visas renewed. All of that stuff is what we have to cope with, and it's stressful. One of our guest speakers, we were going to have intensive seminary courses. One of our guest speakers could not be here with us because he couldn't get his passport renewed in time.
Yeah, I think it's clear to me, the more that God opens my eyes to what our own context looks like and what other people's contexts look like, there's a struggle to keep pace with some of the changes that go along, that naturally come about, whether we're trying to be neighborhood missionaries like we try to do here in North America, or we're in a place like you're talking about, much more fruitful and receptive to the gospel. It's not such an uphill climb there. There's always going to be some of those internal battles. And isolation, it sounds like, is a really difficult thing that you have to deal with no matter what context you're in, especially during COVID. So maybe that's a great lead into my next question about how COVID has changed your ministry, either for the better or for the worse.
Well, COVID has impacted everybody. It's just bad. It's bad. There's nothing good about it everywhere you go. And I know that there are people in the United States who've had the loss of a parent or a loved one, and they haven't been able to be there at the time of their death, or even to have a funeral, proper funeral.
Right.
Now, what the exact same thing happens to us, except we're not in the same city. We're not even in the same country where the parent has died. One of our missionaries lost both of her parents during the pandemic and couldn't even leave the country to be with them. So what that's like, I mean, I lost my father while I was a missionary here, but at least I was able, that was before COVID, only just before COVID, at least I was able to kind of go to his funeral, but we can't even do that. So that has got to be just very hard. It's hard for anybody, but for us, we're not even in the same country.
Yeah, there's a whole different set of boundaries. My grandparents, who were missionaries in West Africa that I keep on mentioning, I lost both of them during the pandemic within a couple months of each other, and how to handle those arrangements, and the place where they was kind of a a hotspot for COVID at that point, and couldn't attend except for virtually, which is, it's nice to be able to participate that way, but it's not the same thing as having the closure of being there, surrounded by family, celebrating a person's life and what God's done through them. So, yeah, I mean, some of those boundaries are still things we experience here, but I'm guessing international boundaries have got to make that even a more difficult hill to climb.
Yes, and one thing might surprise you in America is what America looks like COVID-wise to us living outside of America.
I'd be very curious to hear what that view looks like from where you sit.
Well, we had a missionary whose husband, who's also a missionary, had a heart attack, and we had to airlift him to America. Now, from our perspective, it looked like, okay, let's send him to Wuhan, China, because the COVID in America is so much worse, in recent months anyway, so much worse than anywhere else in the world, that it seems very strange to send someone to America for medical care. So what happened is the nurse attending that we sent with him came down with COVID. She wouldn't have had it if she hadn't gone to America. So America is actually more dangerous than it is to stay in the field here. So that's kind of a strange perspective. You might not think of that.
No, I wouldn't. And I guess, again, these things get so politicized, but it's interesting to note that that's kind of the way that it actually is, or what the perspective is. It's easy to get so kind of set in your own setting and perspective to not be able to see beyond that. So I think maybe that goes back to the heart of why we're having this conversation, is that the church grows in different ways and has different joys and challenges, but we're all after kind of the same thing, lifting Jesus up.
So we're all hoping that you Americans all get vaccinated so that it's safe to visit you, because it's really not at the moment.
I appreciate that, and I think there are plenty of us here who are doing our part to move that along. Well, I wanted to ask from a missionary perspective, because I want to honor your time, and I want to make sure we don't go too over long here. What are some of the physical needs of the people that you serve? Because I know that you mentioned there's some poverty issues there, and then how do you use meeting some of those physical needs as a bridge to the spiritual needs that you're trying to meet as well?
Yes, the physical needs of the people with whom I work vary, because I have everything from American families in the field who are supported by US funds to local people who live on just a few dollars a day, hand to mouth. So that's a huge range of people. So how do you, it's just so different. It's depending on with whom you work. What we do is we provide a congregation which is like a family beyond their family, and family is very important in this culture. Mm-hmm. And people like that. We have for them a supportive family, and when you're family, you support people's physical needs. So mm-hmm. We had a fire right across from the church. It didn't actually burn the church down, but it burned the home down and the business down of a couple of church members, their families. They lost everything, mm-hmm. all their clothes, everything was just burned to the ground, their business completely gone. So what we did was we got together and we helped to rebuild their home. And we donated clothes and we donated food. And Why? Because not just because they're church members, but because there's that family feeling. You know, you love these people and you feel for them. Our congregations, our missions are small, and each of those families is very important. So when they undergo something like that, missionaries, you know, dig into their own pockets, and we have a whip round, so to speak. And, you know, it would be nice if we had a benevolent fund which wasn't missionaries themselves kind of dipping into their own pockets. And that's something to consider, you know, because we don't really have we have budgets for things like projectors and tables and chairs and that sort of thing, but we don't have a budget for a benevolent fund for when somebody's medical costs exceed what they can possibly afford. And here again, you know, they don't have free health care. It's somewhat socialized, but still it's pretty expensive for people around here who may need things that are still very costly.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. I think you kind of answered a question I was just about to ask without even maybe not even knowing it. But the question was, do you have a wish list of things that might be helpful to give? But what I'm hearing you say is sometimes a benevolence fund like that in the hands of people who can kind of address those real needs as they come up, to take care of family members, which we talk about being family here all the time at Emmanuel. Our kind of tagline is following Jesus, finding family. There's supposed to be a family atmosphere in the body of Christ. And when you know someone, you know their needs, it's easier to minister to them, not just their spiritual needs and their emotional needs, but also some of those physical needs that will come up. So I'm thankful to hear that, and that's maybe helpful for us here in our context to know how we can support and encourage and serve you. So I got just a couple more questions. One's a little more on the light side, and one of them is one of the big deep questions that I like to ask. So the first one is what is something you see or experience on a routine basis in your context that might seem very unusual here in the U.S.?
It's got to be driving down the roads.
Oh, yeah?
Because very often people just have a motorcycle, and it's not a Harley Davidson either. It's like an ancient Yamaha that can barely do 30 miles per hour, and they will carry a whole family on one of those, where you've got the driver with no helmet, and his passenger is a woman who's got a baby in one hand and a cell phone in the other, and she's texting and not holding on to the driver. You know, and that's very very dangerous. And then people will carry things like whole doors on a motorcycle while they're trying to drive. They'll carry propane tanks. They'll carry a washing machine or two. It's just crazy, the amount of things that they carry. And then their trucks are just overloaded with bananas, and there's no trains here. So cattle, like pigs, for example, have to be on the roads. So you're in traffic, and there's like a truckload of pigs in front of you. And you kind of feel, you know, bacon takes on a whole new meaning when you...
You can't do it the same way, huh?
No, you don't look at it the same way. And chickens, you know, the feathers are everywhere as you're trying to drive down the road. And there's animals crossing the road, dogs, wild turkeys. And now it's the season for chicks to, you know, be hatched. So you've got families of chicks trying to follow the mother hen across the road. You know, here it's like the old joke, you know, why did the chicken cross the road? You have to ask, why on earth would they cross the road? It's dangerous for anybody to
safer on the side they started on. Yeah. Oh man, I can start to you do a beautiful job of painting that picture, and I'm not sure if myself as a Chicago driver, which is as its own set of dangers, would want to be in that context. So God bless you for diving in there however you do.
Well, I'm glad I had 15 years experience of driving in central London, because that prepared me a bit for the kind of craziness and chaos that is out there on the roads. Except that the roads are bad here. In London, at least, they were good roads. Here they've got potholes, and we have to have a Jeep-like vehicle in order to just negotiate the crevices, in the road,
Right.
some of which are deliberate in order to drain off flood water.
Wow. So it really
And
is not just a road minefield, but it's also human traffic and animal traffic. It sounds like a regular zoo.
it's crazy, yeah. And someone actually who was from Africa told me that they observed that what is happening is just like in Africa, and the attitude of a driver in Africa, and also apparently here, is that everybody who's behind you is unimportant. All you have to do is just get everybody behind you. So cut them off if you have to. As long as you get them behind you, you're fine. So that's kind of what happens. And you either have to laugh or you have to cry. It's crazy.
Just keep yourself safe and get home at the end of the day. Well, my last question is kind of one of those big questions. I think is probably one of the most helpful things I can ask is what can North American Christians seeking to walk with Jesus here learn from your experience and setting?
My first observation would be that we wouldn't be anywhere if we didn't go out and visit people. And so every missionary is a visitor of people. And if I had any message for North Americans, I would say is get out of your houses and visit people. I know that's kind of pre-pandemic talk, but this is really
Right.
the normal. This should be the norm for Christians, because if you don't, your churches will not either exist in the first place. That would be the case in the mission field, that churches just wouldn't exist
Right.
in the first place, or they will not last very long. You have to go out there. One of the things that our seminary students are, and even our professors are, and certainly our pastors are, and our deaconesses, everybody has to go out and visit people.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to some of the conversations we've been having here at Emmanuel about being neighborhood missionaries. And again, visiting people, I think in a pastoral context could look like going to a hospital. Again, pre-COVID, that would be a lot easier, or homebound members. But sometimes it's just being a friend to your neighbor in a time when knowing the people who live right on your block or your cul-de-sac or your subdivision in our context might be a rather strange and sometimes jarring thing, just to be good neighbors. So I'm glad to hear that the spirit of visiting people and just doing some life on life ministry stuff, being the presence of Jesus to others is kind of a worldwide and consistent thing about being the body of Christ.
In the mission field, we know we have something to offer them. And I don't think it's that much different in America. You have something to offer people that they're not going to get elsewhere. And so you have to be confident that in the gospel and what it means. So, yes. Oh, but as a kind of a sidebar, you know what? When the pandemic struck, one of the first things that happened was that the Mormons pulled all their missionaries off the field and sent them back to Utah or whatever, which was kind of interesting. So now we're the only ones who go out and visit people.
Wow. I'm sure there's a much deeper conversation there, but what an opportunity to be the presence of Jesus and solid proclamation of his death and resurrection at a time where maybe there's a little bit of a void there.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we wrap this up in good time, and I very much appreciate the time you spent to talk with me and share a little bit about your context. But my last this is kind of a standard question, I guess, is how can we pray for you and your family as you serve?
Well, pray for us that we would grow in our ability to speak the Spanish language, using it effectively in our mission. Because there's nothing I can do about this, but everybody speaks advanced Spanish. It's not like it's not like they're going to speak beginner Spanish with you. So beginner Spanish, intermediate Spanish, none of that is any good. It has to be advanced, and so that is our biggest challenge for Cheryl and I, anyway. Pray that new hymnal would be published soon. We've been waiting for that for years. Pray that thousands of library books that we're waiting for would arrive soon so we can dedicate the largest Lutheran library in the Caribbean. But we need those books, and they're tied up in red tape at the moment. Pray that individual missionaries in our region and their families would continue to have heavenly support, because we're certainly getting diabolical interference all the time. By God's grace, we can experience what the Bible promises when it says, "Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world." Pray that we would continue to be supported financially to the extent that we can continue to serve here, because we're dependent on this network support models called NSM for our incomes. Our incomes are not budgeted in the synodical budget at all. The synodical mission budget pays for other things, but not for missionary income. So that comes from people like you. Pray that we would remain healthy despite the notorious tropical diseases that are out there. And I had a heart attack in the field. We talked about this other missionary who had a heart attack. Missionaries are looking at themselves before they eat that pile of French fries. Maybe I shouldn't do this, because not only do you have to cope with the medical care in the field, but then you have to be airlifted to dangerous places like America in order to get treatment. And of course, pray that we get the vaccine here, because we haven't got the vaccine as available as you have. And then pray for our regional leadership. Our director, his name is Ted, Pastor Ted Cray. Pray for him. His assistant, we need an associate or assistant regional director. His name is Jonah. So pray that Jonah would get to the mission field here. And all of our regional leaders, that they would continue to be encouraged despite the uphill challenges that they face. So those are some of the 7 different prayer requests.
Right. No, I very much appreciate that long list, because again, I think it can be one of those things that we don't necessarily discuss enough, and that kind of is what stirred up the desire to have this conversation, to know what the context of ministry looks like there. The gospel remains the same, but the context is different. We fight some of the same battles on different fronts, it seems. And I suppose I could ask you to pray for us that we continue to learn what it means to be people who seek out other people, even when it's outside of our comfort zones, and to be the presence of Jesus in our neighborhoods, seeking those opportunities to connect with folks and to support the things that are going to grow the kingdom. I so much appreciate your willingness to come on and talk with me for a little while, Pastor Naumann, and I think we'll sign off for now, but thank you so much for the conversation.
And keep supporting international missions, because then you're making a global change, a global difference, and not just paying your own bills.
Right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. God bless.
You too.